praise for the Matildas despite a defeat against Sweden as England prepares to take on Spain in the Women's World Cup final. Anthony Albanese rallies the troops as Labor ramps up its Voice to Parliament campaign with a referendum date close to being revealed. Donald Trump set to skip the first Republican debate in favour of an interview as he continues to lead in the polls. And also in sport, a huge goal controversy finishes off both Adelaide and Geelong's top 8 chances, while the Blues are set for their first final series in a decade. Good evening, let's begin with the latest from the Women's World Cup where Australia have gone down 2-0 against Sweden, bringing to an end a historic World Cup campaign. Despite the loss, it is the best overall result in any men's or women's World Cup side, and now England will take on Spain in the World Cup final. Our National Affairs editor Austin Pollock has more.
It wasn't the result they were after, but the Matildas are still being praised right across the nation for their historic World Cup campaign. The Aussies went down 2-0 in Brisbane against Sweden last night in the third place playoff match, which means they finished 4th overall, following their 3-1 semi-final loss to England earlier in the week, which saw them miss out on the final. Despite the result, it is the best ever result for an Australian men's or women's side at a World Cup. The Matildas started off with a 1-0 win over Ireland before a 2-3 loss to Nigeria, and after that it was a 4-0 smashing of Canada, sending them into the round of 16 where they defeated Denmark. Then, in the quarterfinal, they beat France in a heart-stopping 7-6 penalty shootout. Now, like the nation, we've had plenty of politicians following along with the action. The federal government announcing the Play Our Way grants program with an investment of $200 million. The PM says that it will promote equality access, build more suitable facilities, and support grassroots initiatives to get women and girls to engage, stay, and participate in sport throughout their lives. The program is open to all sports, but soccer is set to dominate. In a statement, the Australian Professionals League, the governing body for the A-League and men's and women's, welcomed the announcement, but still outlined a key ask for the Women's League. They said, quote, player development is funded at a loss. Broadcast production is funded at a loss. Match days are funded at a loss. We simply ask the government to match our investment to underpin the future of the game. Now, what they're asking for is $12 million, which is the equivalent to 5% of the federal government funding for the AFL stadium in Tasmania, which they would benefit hundreds of female players, thousands of girls, and millions of Australians.
We're going to see an explosion in participation in sport, and that is why this $200 million will make a difference to not just recognise that this has been a moment of national inspiration, but to seize the opportunity for the next generation.
Now tonight, England take on Spain in the final, Spain coming off a 2-1 win over Sweden. 6 News will continue to follow all the action on our socials throughout the evening.
Anthony Albanese has rallied the troops as Labor ramp up their Voice to Parliament campaign. Speaking at the end of the ALP's national conference, the Prime Minister said supporters need to campaign harder than ever before. Multiple polls have shown a steady decline in support for the Yes campaign over the past several months. Last week, a senior Labor source told 6 News the party is looking to avoid making the voice about themselves and is instead focusing on having Indigenous people lead the campaign. A date for the referendum is yet to be announced, but the PM has confirmed we should know fairly soon.
Winning this referendum will depend on the conversations you have, the calls you make, the doors you knock on, the people you reach.
It's time for recognition. Delegates, together we can make this country a better place for all. And in the language of my people, the Wiradjuri, Nagali, Yahagi, Barangara, Manwanbul. Let's get this done together.
Speculation is mounting about October 15 potentially being the date that Australians will head to the polls, although it could be held as late as November 25. It is now less than a week until polls close in the Victorian seat of Warrandyte, with a by-election called to replace Liberal MP Ryan Smith. The Liberals are likely to hold on, helped by Labor's decision not to contest, which could also be seen as a big boost for the Greens. Our reporter Lincoln Holmes has the latest from Victoria.
Voters in the Victorian state seat of Warrandyte will be heading to the polls on Saturday following the resignation of Victorian Liberal MP Ryan Smith. Smith resigned back in May, saying he had increasingly become uncomfortable with the growing negative tone of politics, believed to be linked to the leader John Pesutto's handling of Moira Deeming that has caused controversy in the Liberal Party throughout 2023. 12 candidates will be contesting. That includes 5 independents: the Freedom Party, Family First, Sustainable Australia and the Victorian Socialists. The Liberals are running Nicole Werner as their candidate, after 7 different rounds of voting among members back in June. Werner ran in Box Hill in 2022, where the Liberals suffered an 8.9% swing away from the party on a primary vote basis. Their chances may be improved by the lack of a Labor candidate. However, the party has chosen not to contest despite calls from some members and the possibility they could actually win. That's likely to help the Democratic Labor Party, who may benefit from some voter confusion about their name. The biggest opponent to the Liberals is set to be the Greens, who have Manningham Deputy Mayor Thomas Lightbody as their candidate. Their vote in Warrandyte peaked at 14% in 2006. The federal Aston by-election in April could be useful for figuring out any type of swing that occurs, if at all, to the Greens. That seat saw a huge 6% swing to Labor's Mary Doyle, who won the seat, and Warrandyte has similar demographics. That being said, some issues in Aston don't apply here. Polls close 6 p.m. local time on Saturday.
Former North Melbourne captain Jack Ziebell has been assaulted in an unprovoked attack outside of a Melbourne bar. Ziebell was with some of his teammates and club staff to celebrate his final AFL game earlier in the day against Richmond. It is believed he was attacked immediately after leaving the bar by a group of men, suffering injuries to his face and head. Ziebell spent the night in hospital. Police have described it as an unprovoked attack. We'll have more in sport a little later in the hour. Donald Trump is set to skip the first Republican Party debate over an interview. The former US president has consistently led in the polls all year. In some polls, he's had more of the vote than other Republican candidates combined. Trump has reportedly pre-recorded an interview with former Fox News host Tucker Carlson. The debate is happening Wednesday night local time. That is 2 days before he had to voluntarily surrender after an arrest warrant was issued for him in the state of Georgia over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. 7 people are dead after a Russian missile hit a theatre in northern Ukraine. A 6-year-old girl was one of those killed, with another 15 children among a total of 144 who were wounded. Other victims included people celebrating an Orthodox Christian holiday at church. Ukraine's president described it as a terrorist attack. The RSPCA has been given advice that an animal cruelty lawsuit over footage that shows greyhounds being kicked and beaten was unlikely. At the end of July, footage emerged allegedly showing acts of animal cruelty towards the greyhounds, including puppies and the use of rabbits as live baits, prompting calls for criminal charges. The drone footage led to Greyhound Racing SA investigating the 3 trainers depicted in the video footage. However, the RSPCA has received independent legal advice that the evidence would likely be disallowed if criminal charges were brought against the 3 trainers. In South Australia, it is a criminal offence to use an optical surveillance device such as a drone to record the carrying on of a private activity without consent. Under laws that apply in the state, judges can determine whether unlawfully obtained evidence, such as the drone footage in question, can be admitted as evidence in criminal proceedings. The investigation saw the trainer's licence stripped. as well as a fine of $180,000. The Northern Territory general election is only a year away, but there are some who are believing that Labor may be in trouble. The country Liberal Party was last in government back in 2016, but 2024 might be their year to return to power. Our chief anchor Leo Puglisi has the details on the ground in Darwin.
Here in the Northern Territory, the incumbent Labor government is in their second term and they are looking for their third next year. Michael Gunner, of course, he was elected in a landslide back in 2018 after a single term of country Liberal government. It was the worst defeat of a sitting government in the history of the NT. The CLP reduced to just 2 seats. Of course, in 2020, after some pretty extraordinary parliamentary circumstances that almost saw Territory Alliance become the official NT opposition, Labor did lose a couple of seats, but fairly comfortably held on to power. Gunner, of course, resigned in 2022, having led the NT through COVID. Chief Minister has been Natasha Fyles since then. Now, there's been a number of big issues at play in the Territory. There are a number of big issues, crime, of course, being one that has made the national spotlight. There was a piece back in the NT News in June. It said that the CLP should be odds-on favourite to win next year's election, but it's not because of itself. There was even a no-confidence motion in leader Leah Finocchiaro at a members' meeting, though it was defeated. There's also been 3 by-elections since the 2020 election. One, Dally, saw a Labor gain from the CLP. Fanny Bay was narrowly retained, meanwhile, by Labor after Gunner resigned from Parliament. And early this year, massive swing to Labor as they held on to Arafura. Labor has gone backwards, though. Blaine MP Mark Turner, he was expelled from the caucus of the Labor Party, sat as an independent Labor MP. That was before the Daly by-election win. After that, he was expelled from the party altogether, so he's now just an independent. Can't forget we won't see Territory Alliance next year. That party managed to get more seats than the CLP before the 2020 election, but ended up winning just 1 before Robin Lambley resigned from the party, and the party ended up disbanding soon after. As for the Greens, they have representation on 2 different local councils, but have never managed to get a seat at the territory or federal level in the NT, not helped by the fact that, like the ACT, there is no upper house, but unlike the ACT, there is no multi-member electorate. So the Greens have pretty much struggled to get any kind of representation here in the territory. The 2024 NT election will be held on August 24.
Brisbane's Echo has today wrapped up with hundreds of thousands of people heading to the annual show. Organisers say this year is looking like one of the biggest in recent times, with over 165,000 people going through the gates in just the first 4 days. 6 News' Roman McKinnon has the details from Queensland.
Today, the Echo has officially wrapped up after 10 successful days. 400,000 Queenslanders flocked through the gates this year, marking an extremely positive bounce-back result for the RNA. The busiest day, of course, was People's Day on Wednesday, with 60,000 Queenslanders entering the gates. Crowd numbers averaged at 40,000, with showgoers enjoying rides, show bags, displays and pavilions. Good weather over the 10 days also helped Queenslanders enjoy the 2023 show. These numbers are better than pre-COVID attendances, with positive numbers each day. We also saw a guest appearance from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and with the multiple sporting events like the AFL, NRL and Women's World Cup in Brisbane, crowds still returned for the annual tradition.
To sport now, and there has been a huge goal controversy in the AFL. With just over a minute remaining, Adelaide's Ben Keays looked like he had kicked what may have been the match-winning goal, but the goal umpire called it a point. Sydney were then able to hang on, winning by a single point despite leading by 44 earlier in the game. No score review occurred, and it initially appeared that the ball may have hit the padding on the post. However, a closer look from multiple angles appears to show the ball missing. The loss means the Crows are now out of the finals race, as well as Geelong, who had lost to St Kilda earlier in the evening. The Cats still had the small chance, but Sydney winning eliminated that possibility. Meanwhile, Carlton is locked in for their first final series since 2013 with a come-from-behind win over the Gold Coast. The Blues were down by 33 points at quarter time, but ended up winning by 4 points. In the VFL, struggling standalone side Coburg have finished their season without a single win. Going down by 15 points against Essendon, the Lions looked to be fighting back late in the final quarter, but it wasn't enough, seeing them finish firmly on the bottom of the ladder at 0 wins, 18 losses. Ahead of them are two other struggling clubs, the Northern Bullants, who had 2 wins early on in the season, but were unable to have any more, finishing 20th. In round 18, they scored only 4 points for the entire game against Footscray, equaling the lowest score in the club's VFL history and the lowest score by any club since 1919. The club's coach, Brodie Holland, resigned effective immediately shortly after the club's final game of the season last week. This was his first season. It is the first time a VFL side has been winless for an entire season since Frankston in 2015. Frankston themselves finishing 19th with 4 wins. The home and away season wrapped up today. Next week will be a wildcard round played between those 17th to 10th on the ladder before the normal final series begins. Let's return to the latest on the Indigenous voice to Parliament now, and campaigners are looking to get the multicultural vote in the upcoming referendum. Back in late May, around 120 cultural organisations announced their support for the voice. Not all are backing it, however. A group called Multicultural Voices Against the Voice, led by the leader of the Australians United Party, has been set up. In WA, the West Australian newspaper reports that senior Labor insiders believe it can't be won in the state. A recent Resolve poll had 56% of the state voting no, only behind Queensland and the state with the most opposition to the voice.
Getting in touch with all of the multicultural groups and communities and trying to engage with them and make sure that we can speak to their members. Over this weekend, I would have done probably around about 5 events that are all multicultural community groups and or events organised by senators and members of parliament at the federal level. So I would have done all of these. I will be speaking also over the next few weeks at a number of these events. And so we're really just getting in touch with all of the multicultural communities, and particularly the young people at multicultural communities who are the future and who are really already very much entrenched in the Yes campaign, and engaging with them to continue to roll it out to their parents and to their elders in the community to say how much it is an important priority for them, for the parents to be voting yes as well.
Some people within the multicultural communities I've spoken to says, why should we put one race ahead of the other? That's one of the key questions they have. How do you respond to them?
Very simply, the fact is that, the Aboriginal people have had the disadvantage perpetrated against them for 230 years. I was at a funeral yesterday for a little girl who was 1 year old, and she died at our local hospital. And 5 of the people in the congregation were actually chained by handcuffed to their security guards at that funeral. And what struck me was that these were young Aboriginal men, and there's more likelihood of Aboriginal men ending up in jail than of them going to university. That is completely at odds with what we would consider an appropriate society. So given that they've had that disadvantage and that they are the First Nations people, they are the people who were the traditional custodians of this land, they should have rights that some of the others don't or shouldn't. But let's go back to that issue around the rights or the voice for multicultural communities. I'm on a numerous number of communities, advisory groups for the multicultural communities to Parliament. I give advice to governments on a regular basis, both at the state level and at the federal level. So we do have a voice. We have advocacy groups like the Ethnic Communities Council, like various other multicultural services centres, etc. We already have a voice to government and to Parliament through those advisory groups. The one group that doesn't have the voice are the Aboriginal people.
Two controversial freedom parties, the Informed Medical Options Party, IMOP, and the Health Australia Party, HAP, have announced that they are merging to form the Heart Party. The new party, which stands for Health, Environment, Accountability, Rights, Transparency, currently has registration with the AEC pending and is also looking to get registered in Victoria and New South Wales. Both parties are looking to get their first ever elected representatives, having never had any local, state or federal success. Speaking to 6 News, Imop founder Michael O'Neill said he doesn't care about being called an anti-vaxxer over the party's controversial vaccination policies.
There's been a trend amongst our supporters to be calling and saying, why don't you guys get together? Because we were so closely aligned on our policies and our direction. And so it just seemed a natural fit. We are very big on the environment. And in fact, a lot of our supporters are very ex-Green, but very unhappy with the direction of the Greens. And we want, as in all things, we want the truth about whatever narrative is going around, We also understand that that the media and its current direction is not the most reliable source of good information, not including Channel 6 in that, of course, Alea. But they can call me an anti-vax, they can call me anything. I don't care. But I think in the political sphere, I should have the right of reply and fair balance in media, which you're doing.
I think HAP's executive believe that merging forces is a necessary step, since the values and goals are exactly the same pretty much. And the national presence, the resources will be far greater in terms of, reaching out to others and getting other people on board with those values, and working together and collaborating as best as we can with a lot of passion and energy.
All right, now here is Ivan and Melly with a look at what is making news in Perth on WAMN News.
Thanks, Darby. Tonight on WAMN News, will you change your mind on The Voice? New polling underway to discover whether WA is open to change their vote, as commentator says it's time to suspend the referendum. A WAMN News exclusive.
Also tonight, the rare sighting of a dolphin at the Swan River Bank surprises Perth residents and tourists.
Housing heartbreak, an elderly couple begs for government assistance after builders' collapse ruins their retirement plans.
International trade opens up to WA as Southeast Asian countries seek import trade opportunities. And later, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Thanks to Ivan and Melly there. A reminder of the top stories we are following here on 6 News this hour. And the Matildas have gone down 2-0 against Sweden, finishing off their historic campaign. Despite the loss, it was the best overall result for any men's or women's Australian side at a World Cup. Now England will take on Spain in the final. And Anthony Albanese has rallied the troops as Labor ramps up its Voice to Parliament campaign. Speaking at the end of the ALP's national conference, the Prime Minister said supporters need to campaign harder than ever before. Speculation is mounting about October 15 potentially being the date that Australians will head to the polls, although it could be held as late as November 25. And that is 6 News for this hour. There is more news 24/7 on our website 6newsau.com and on social media. Just search 6NewsAU to find us. More news coverage continues right after this. For now though, I'm Darby Travers. Good night.